Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest once again today is Ian Fraiser, and Ian is a part of the Center for Mission Mobilization. He joined us last week for part one, so if you are just jumping into this and you didn't already hear the previous episode, you may want to pause this and go back because we're building on some concepts and a discussion that we were having. But we won't jump into that right away. First, Ian, welcome, my friend. Glad to have you back on the SRS Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yeah. Hey, tell us about yourself in regard to maybe where you went to college. You already shared on the last episode that you grew up in the Philippines, but where did you go to college to learn your creative ninja skills? And maybe what do you do when you're not doing, graphic design, art management, ministry stuff, and you're not just hanging with the family, although you can do that too. But tell us about your hobbies. Tell us about your life. So give us some more context. Who's Ian?
Yeah, so I went to John Brown University in Salem Springs, Arkansas, which is, a fairly small town, but is the design program there is excellent, actually. It's one of the biggest majors at JBU, and they have, just really incredible faculty and pretty good job placement, too. And my parents, I mentioned earlier that I'm a missionary kid. My parents were heading back overseas. And so even though I'd gone to high school in Florida, I really didn't have any geographical ties anywhere in the States. And so, I looked at like 7 different colleges. I visited 7 different colleges and ended up choosing JBU. Super glad I did because I met my wife the week before school started. But it's been, we didn't really expect to stick around in this area, honestly. Like I said, most of us both of us were thinking that we would be involved in missions in some way. But we decided to stick around. So as far as hobbies go, because we're in beautiful Arkansas in the foothills of the Ozarks, we enjoy getting outside as much as we can. Hiking or camping are kind of our go-tos. I haven't gotten into dirt biking yet, but there's a really good dirt bike track just like right down the road from me that we often just go and hike. And my son likes to pretend that he's on a bike and try to go off the jumps and stuff, which is a lot of fun. I think beyond being outside, I do really enjoy reading. I have several coworkers who make fun of me for reading fiction, but I don't know. Story is really important to me as a creative. So I'm not going to let go of my fiction. It's important.
You can have a fiction addiction. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I do read nonfiction too. Okay.
You and I are probably 10, 15 years apart in age. And of course, I also went to John Brown many years before you, and I was even an adjunct there and on their biblical advisory board at some point. But man, I resonate with everything you're saying. Like, I did not think I would be in Arkansas down the road, and here I am. Wow, 25 years later, and this is home. This is home for us. And we even left. We came back. So I'm with you. And by the way, for our listeners, in case you haven't heard, the number one destination now for mountain biking, and as well as there's a ton of dirt bike stuff and just like greenway, like paved road, just special trails and paths and all that. It's Northwest Arkansas. We have become, Ian, a vacation destination. Could you imagine that?
Yeah.
Back when we were going to school.
Yeah. My neighbor has a room in her house that she rents out on Airbnb, and a while back, I grew up in the Philippines. A while back, she had a Filipino couple staying with her because they'd come just to mountain bike. They had come from the Philippines
Wow.
to mountain bike in this area. So yeah, it's a great spot.
Yeah, get outside, Oz Trails. That's all we'll say about that. We need to go ahead and move forward. I think you and I could nerd out here about all the outside things we can do. But anyway, thank you for telling us a little bit more about yourself. If you recall from last week, we were talking about that whole process of how do you get a potential supporter, if not someone who's an actual supporter, because, I mean, let's face it, if you are living off support, you need to really maintain and build those relationships with your prayer and financial team. But how do you connect the dots for them where they aren't just thinking, I don't know what he does. I mean, he calls himself kind of a missionary, or he calls himself a mobilizer, or whatever, you want to add on there. But I don't get it. Like, as far as I can tell, he just kind of sits at a computer. Is he really involved in missions? So not that everybody's going to say that quite like that, although might some, but how do you answer that sometimes unspoken question?
Yeah, I think over the years I've gone about that differently. I am a design nerd, so I can nerd out for quite a while talking about the specifics of what I do and the theory of what I do, and how, it's not just making things pretty, how it's not just pushing pixels, how communicating well can change people's minds. So I could go off on that for a while. I feel like I've discovered, though, over the years, that people are not as interested in that as I am. And so I think for me, I have learned when I'm doing a support appointment with someone new that I'm trying to bring on my team, that I focus most of what I talk about on the big picture of my organization, the Center for Mission Mobilization. So I'm trying to show them how strategic our work is. I'm trying to show them that there's a need. I'm trying to show them that I am personally invested in this. And I do talk about my role a little bit, and do talk about how we're telling the story of mobilization well. But to a certain extent, I think that people can get it, because, like I said, they don't care about logos as much as I do, but they, as believers, care about what God cares about, and care about the unreached, those who've never heard the gospel. And so if I major on that, I feel like that's what's actually going to pull them in. That's what's actually going to woo them. That's what's actually going to make them feel like, oh, I can be a part of this. I can partner with Ian and be a part of helping reach the unreached. And so once I have someone on my team, then each of my newsletters, I'm really trying to tie that thread, so to speak, tie the knot between what I'm doing here in Northwest Arkansas and what's happening in Malaysia or whatever. But on the outset, I usually just focus pretty heavily on the big idea of what our organization is. And, it may be that 2 years from now, I realize maybe I should focus a little bit more on tying that knot. But so far, 7 years in, that seems to be working fairly well.
Right. And so it sounds like it's very important for you to have a real story of a changed life, and to take ownership, to be a part of why that's happening. And, I shared an example with you in the previous episode before this, but it sounds like you need to take that story or similar stories and help people really, that connect the dots between the fact that when Ian does his job well as the art director, it actually helps the missionaries with Center for Mission Mobilization. It helps them do their job well and help change lives. And it's not, you're not this unnecessary part of the equation. No, God has called you and is using you as a critical part of the larger equation. And so as you connect that, like, what is there a story maybe that you've used once or twice or even a couple dozen times that you'd be willing to share with us today that you use to help connect the dots for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, when I was actually the first job I ever did for the Center for Mission Mobilization was before I was on staff. I was actually hired on as a freelancer and did that for about a year before I joined staff. And I was working on some promotional material for the Perspectives on the World Christian Movement course. At that time, the CMM was running the Perspectives courses, and so I got to work with my current boss, Joe Mickey, and actually his wife is a photographer, so he and she did this photo shoot of this paint-soaked piece of string, this cord, and that became the centerpiece of all this marketing material for the Perspectives course. And so the Perspectives course is about seeing how God's heart for the nations is throughout Scripture. We call it that red line of God's heart for the nations throughout Scripture. And so this photo, there was a background of our marketing material, visualized that. And so before I even came on staff, I was a part of that project. And the year that I joined staff, we got this story from someone in the UK who said that he was actually like really impacted by just seeing that photo. The detail that Joe and his wife Audra went into to capture, to get that paint to look almost bloody, because it is that thread throughout Scripture, and it terminates at the cross, because it's Jesus' love for us, Jesus' love for the nations, that really ties the knot, so to speak, at the end of that story. And so it's almost a very visceral image. And this guy told someone who told us, it kind of came through this chain of events, that he like stopped dead in his tracks looking at that poster, realizing that the same Jesus that he worshiped and knew and loved, and the same Jesus that he knew loved him enough to die for him, had just abounding love for the nations as well. And for him, that was that connection point of realizing, man, if I'm in this thing with Jesus, I need to be about the things that he's about as well. And so it's stories like that really, get your heart pounding, get you moving, get you really excited about what you're able to do.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that example. That's perfect. So let's ask a little bit more about, being the person that's fully funded, that works at HQ. Now, I know you've been fully funded for 7 years, but like most people who are fully funded, every now and then you might need to grow in some breadth or depth because there's new needs, or things cost more, or you might get a slight salary bump, but then of course you also probably have greater healthcare costs and all that stuff. So, you stay fully funded, though. Of course, there's times where people have to drop off or leave or whatever else. So, every now and then, not all the time, but I know that rarely, but every now and then you've kind of pressed pause temporarily and rebuilt a couple percent of what you need for your team. So, what drives you to be committed to having that funding team, to staying fully funded? Like what keeps you on that path? Because we all know 100% is it's not a static thing. It can move. You can find yourself at 98% one day or whatever else. And a lot of leaders just let it go until it goes from crisis to full on emergency. But I don't get the sense that you do that, Ian. So what drives you to stay fully funded, and what else have you learned, on your journey, being a quote unquote office staff?
I think a couple of things really have been advantageous in that process. One is that my boss is fully on support as well. And his boss's boss is fully support raised. And his boss's boss's boss is fully support raised. So all the way to the top, they get it. And they understand, these are all HQ people, headquarters staff, who understand what it's like to try to balance the deadlines at the end of the week and being fully funded. And so I've been really fortunate that my leadership has okayed me to go and raise support full time at different periods. I'm actually in a period of that right now. And that's not something I take lightly, I guess. That's really important and really crucial to me being able to do what I do. And I think this is both self-talk and what I end up saying to people as I am raising support is that I want to be back in my chair because I am excited about the things that are coming around the corner. Right now, I mean, there's some work that we will be diving into at the end of this year and the coming year that will probably be some of the best work that I've been a part of my career. And so I can't wait to get to the point where I'm, fully funded and more than enough so that I can focus fully on that work, those projects that are coming. And if I can just, exude a portion of that to the people who I'm asking to either increase or to come on as new supporters, then that helps them see why it is that the urgency of it, I suppose, and just the fact that I'm excited about what's coming next. I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's great stuff. And it's so true. You do need to cast a vision for what's coming next of what your job is. You can't just say, look what we did, look what we did, look what we did. Hey, can you pray and give us money? No, a vision, it's forward looking. And quite honestly, vision gives you kind of gas in your tank, right? Yeah. To get out there and invite your team. And I know you don't have to do that a lot, but what does that look like for you? Because I know we have a lot of different missionaries and just supported workers from all over the world that ask this question. In fact, this might be one of the most common questions I get. So I'd love to hear your take on it. But so am I supposed to stop my job altogether, or am I just supposed to take it like an hour a day, or how do I do that? How? And in fact, Ian, just if you don't mind sharing, I know you've been fully funded for a long time, but you did need to raise a little amount here at the end, towards the end of the year. What is that financial goal, and how are you organizing your time to do it without just quitting and walking away and not having any responsibility for months on end?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier we had another baby, which is super exciting. Also means that I need to look at my budget again. And so it was a really good excuse, honestly, to take a look at our monthly needs and make sure that we were good across the board. Also, going back and looking at things, I realized that there were a couple of areas that we had continually spent money on, and without realizing that it was a habit, so to speak. So, for instance, I've been doing more traveling for my job than has been true in the past, 5 years or wherever. I was down in Brazil at the end of last year, out in Arizona that year as well. And so I hadn't been deliberately setting aside funds for those types of trips. So that was something that I needed to plan for in the future, because I knew it was going to become this rhythm. Additionally, we've had some medical needs in our family that we've been able to cover, but also looking to the future, realizing, okay, this is going to be an ongoing thing. We really need to make sure that we've got what we need to cover those things. So my goal is by the end of the month, which I've got like a week left as of,
At the time of recording, you have exactly 8 days left.
Exactly. So my goal is to make an additional $500 a month in raising
Okay.
our budget. So
Okay.
I'm at about 325 of that. I've got lots of asks out there, still waiting on responses. So that's kind of how we're doing it. We sort of take it in some bites, so to speak.
I want to point out a resource that not all of our listeners have probably read. If you're eager to work hard to develop a solid, faithful support team to undergird your ministry for the long haul, you might want to pick up a copy of the book called Viewpoints. It's compiled and authored by Steve Shadrack, and this book called Viewpoints is filled with encouraging case studies and anecdotes that will encourage you in the support raising process. You can pick up Viewpoints at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast.
I think what's cool about this season is that this season of full-time support raising for me was not something that I initiated. Actually, my boss came to me and said, "Hey, I see, this is a little bit of a break in our team's schedule, and I know that you guys have had a baby. I also know that you've mentioned, that you haven't set aside funds well for these trips. I want you to go back and look at your budget and tell me what you think it really should be." So I came back to him and I said, "Okay, here's what I think our budget should be." And he said, "Nope, I don't think that's enough. I think you're selling yourself short. I think you really need to go back and pray and ask God, what is it that we need to be bringing in order to fully thrive in our ministry." So I went back to the drawing board, came back to him and said, "Okay, here's what I think we need to fully thrive." And he said, "Okay, send that off to the finance department, get it approved, and then you can go for it." And so for Joe, for my boss, he was willing to make the sacrifice to let me do this full time for a season. And it has not been easy for him. I can see that. He doesn't, mention that every day by any means, but I can see that he's got to pull a little bit of extra weight in order to let me step off and do this. But that's not that's not a super common thing for our team, that we would take a full month or whatever to get away from our job.
But it's what it took in this season
Exactly.
for you to knock this out. And if you have 325 of the 500 that's approved, that's needed, done at this moment, and you have multiple asks already out there, meaning people probably said maybe, or they said yes, but they haven't connected the dots yet.
Mm-hmm.
You have 8 days left. I mean, you're on track. You might be fully funded 8 days from now, or you might be pretty close to that $500, and you might need to get a couple days more in a week or two or something like that to continue to work on it. But I think the point, I really appreciate kind of digging into all this, is there's some thought and effort and time adjustment and communication, but it's a value for you, because your team needs you. You want to do the work for the kingdom, but if your family and ministry can't both thrive, obviously it's gonna go the wrong way. And so I just thank you for sharing so specific, some more specifics about your plan and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, and that, like I said, that's not the only way that we make sure that we're at full support. Our team takes a half day every Thursday collectively to work on support raising. So some of our teammates don't come into the office that morning; they stay at home. Some of us can focus better when we are at the office, but by having a morning set aside as a team, it's good accountability to actually get it done. And we're able to do that better. And then we've also, I have another teammate who is kind of doing a hybrid model right now. She's taking, I believe, is 1 day a week to focus on support raising. So, she's needing to raise a little bit, but it doesn't warrant taking, all 5 days a week off. But my boss is giving her the leeway to just, make a lot of calls on Fridays. And then obviously those appointments are going to be scattered throughout the week, but she can kind of focus on Fridays on support raising.
Well, for our listeners, I just want to emphasize here. So Ian has to do the bulk of the work, quote unquote, by himself. I know Stephanie helps. I know that you're probably using a support raising software and you have a target amount and you're taking the time and all that stuff. But you're not really doing it alone. Meaning, Ian, there are people that are praying for you, that are carrying some of the load, so to speak, that frees you up, and I think that generally speaking, there is that hybrid model, and that's going to work for some people for smaller amounts. But the best way, probably for most people, is to, man, it's all they do. And in fact, at the time we're recording this, Ian, I'll just tell you, I'm fully funded, but I do have a slight goal as we're getting close to next year, and I plan to take probably 80 to 85% of a week coming up next month. To just try and do a little extra to kind of refill a little portion of my team as I head into 2021. And then whether or not I work on it the following week or not, it really kind of depends on what happens that particular week. And so but you know what? I actually turned down a couple of different meetings, things I would like to do for the sake of the gospel and the kingdom. I've had to turn down a couple of things for that week because I have it on my calendar right here. I mean, I'm looking at it at this moment. It says support raising week, ? Meaning for me, it's, can I keep my calendar clear enough to try and have a handful of really key appointments before I get to the end of the year and make up that slight difference that I need to tackle. So anyway, I think you're a great example, and I appreciate you sharing with us about what you're doing, and the fact that you're an HQ, you're a headquarters missionary, and it's not just possible, it's happening. You're a fully funded kind of guy and family man, and also that doesn't mean that everything's always easy, but you take the time to work on it. And quite honestly, Ian, you're the type of great example that we all need, and by us all, I do mean everybody who raises and lives off support, but even more particular for others that have a quote unquote office job. I know sometimes they feel like second class, citizens in the missions world. And it's just not true. That's not true at all. Your job is crucial, and I've seen evidence of it. And I thank you for what you do and for the partner you are in ministry. And I appreciate you sharing with us today. Our kind of the last thing I often do at the end of someone being a guest is I kind of give them the last words. So Ian, before we end our podcast, final words of wisdom that you might share for others that are wondering about whether or not a full-time office staff person can take the time and make things work and be fully funded.
Yeah, I think the key to being fully funded as HQ, home office, stateside staff is for you to believe that you are worthy of the wage. And this can sometimes be a struggle, but we need to go to Jesus and ask, am I worthy of the wage? Is what you've called me to worthy of being fully funded? And when we can hear him say, yes, well done, good and faithful servant, then that gives us the confidence to portray to others that we are worthy of the wage.
That's awesome, Ian. Well, hey, brother, thank you for joining us for a couple of episodes here on the Support Raising Solutions podcast. God bless you in your final 8 days. Hopefully by the time this episode is published, you'll be able to say, I'm fully funded once again.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, thank you again for being with us. I certainly appreciate your time and sharing about your experience and wisdom.
Thank you. Appreciate being on.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisersolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.